the Hachibu slide. Now, in this case, the text isn't exactly aligned with the eyes, but it's aligned in such a way that, although again, we're not conscious of it, but the eyes and the text sort of go together. So it sort of flows naturally. The next concept is called proximity, and the idea behind proximity is that elements that are related should be closer together and things which are not related should be further apart. You know, elements that are close together, the audience is going to assume that they're somehow related, and if they're not, then they should be at a greater distance. And again, it's best to explain this with a simple example. So look at this title slide here. You can see 4 text elements plus a logo. And in this case, it's really hard to tell which is more important, right? We see principles of presentation design. The second line is actually a subtitle, and then there's the name and his position. But it's not really clear which is more important than the other. In this example, the second example, it's very, very clear. So the first 2 lines of text are close together because they're more related. It's the title, the main part of the title, and then the subtitle. And then down below is the name. So the name and the gentleman's position, those are together. And the logo, again, is separated because that's the third element. So now we see there's actually 3 elements, not 5 elements. So when I look at this slide, the main problem is I just can't read the text. So how could we improve this? And in this slide, this is the title slide, and here there were 2 things. The first thing is proximity. Before the text was far apart. In this case, it's really come together as 2 text elements. It's the title with the subtitle in close proximity, and then the name, which is very separate, so it's further away. And then the idea of contrast. So now the background behind the text is almost black, which contrasts very well with the white, and then the photograph below eases in, and it's another element which draws us in. So remember, these design concepts are not hard and fast rules. They're simply guides, and not every concept will apply to every slide or every visual. If you want more examples, you can look at my book where I do highlight all of the concepts and others as well. But you know, you can find these examples of these concepts used in graphic design in the world around you. In fact, that's where I get a lot of my inspiration and where I've learned a lot over the years how to apply the concepts is, for example, driving down the road and looking at billboards, or on the train when I'm on the subway. Every morning I'm looking at graphic design and advertisements, and you really can learn a lot, and you can see how professional designers actually do use many of these concepts in all of their designs as well. Okay, so we've looked at preparation and design, and now it's time to move to the delivery stage. Now, we've done a lot of work in the preparation and design, and it takes a lot of time. But in the delivery stage, this is where we put it all together and where we actually perform and present to our audience. And the key tenet running through the delivery stage is one of naturalness. And when I think of naturalness, I have to go back to Steve Jobs again, the master presenter. And this also brings up the issue of rehearsal. People always ask me about this. Does Steve Jobs rehearse a lot to look so natural on stage? And as a matter of fact, there is quite a bit of rehearsal that goes into his presentations. But there are different feelings about this. For some people, they feel that if they rehearse too much, then they'll lose that degree of naturalness. So it depends on your case. Each case is different. In my case, I do rehearse, and the more that I rehearse, then I'm able to be very natural in front of an audience. Because like any master, such as the master swordsman or the master artist in any field, the master has already got the technique down. So they don't have to think about the next step. They don't have to worry about technique. In fact, they don't even worry about winning or losing. At that moment, you begin to think about winning or losing, or how am I doing? That's the moment that you begin to fail, actually. So presentation is an art form in a sense, and it's the art of telling a story. And if you're going to tell a story, you have to make a connection. And if you're worried about technique, you can't make a connection. You have to be right here, right now, in this moment, and that's something the master presenter does really well. You can actually learn delivery skills from some unusual places, even from the world of judo. For example, if you look at Jigoro Kano's 5 principles of judo, you can see that actually all of them to some degree or another can be directly applied to delivery skills. So all five of these can apply to our world of delivering a presentation, but it's two of them in particular that I think have direct relevance. The first one, which is carefully observe yourself and your situation. And although we say it's important to be in the moment, remember the art of presenting or the art of telling a story is also connecting with the audience. And you can't do that if you're not aware of your audience and aware of your surroundings. And of course, the fourth one, which is know when to stop. And this one is almost funny because this is a real problem with most presentations, is that the presenter goes over time or doesn't know when to stop. So given 20 minutes, they take 30, given 40 minutes, they take an hour, and so on. So this is really key. Always know when to stop your presentation. So what about the issue of presenting under fire? You know, you're in a situation where there's a lot of pushback from the audience, or maybe, you know, they're sort of pushing you and disagreeing with you in a kind of aggressive fashion. So how should you deal with that? Well, once again, we can sort of take something from the world of judo. Jigoro Kano had this to say about dealing with an opponent. Victory, he says, over the opponent is achieved by giving way to the strength of the opponent, adapting to it, and taking advantage of it, turning it in the end to your own advantage. Well, you might be saying, what does this have to do with actual presentations, though, when I'm dealing with, you know, presenting under fire or dealing with someone who's quite aggressive? And for me, what this means is that we should always keep to the high ground and never ourselves become emotional, and remain always gracious and courteous and polite, and simply deal with the question at hand. And when we do that, when we keep to the higher ground, we're able to simply deal with the situation and then move on to the next question. One of my favorite presenters who understands the importance of being in the moment and present is Benjamin Zander. Benjamin Zander is actually the conductor of the Boston Philharmonic Orchestra, but he's also an amazing presenter. And the main takeaway I've gotten from Benjamin Zander is this idea of contribution. You know, a lot of presenters sort of doubt themselves when they're presenting, and they worry, how am I doing? Is the audience liking me? Am I doing a good enough job? But Benjamin Zander says it's all about contribution. And again, at that moment that you begin to doubt yourself or to ask yourself, is this good enough? You know, we need to avoid that kind of thinking. It's simply about being right here, right now, making a contribution with this audience. It's just a presentation after all. And speaking of music, I've learned a lot from the art of jazz. I've been a jazz musician since I was a kid and still perform to this day. And it's funny, I've learned through music that where there is no connection, there can be no contribution. And in the world of jazz, of course the audience is important, but what I'm really talking about is me as a musician working with other jazz musicians on stage. And we have to listen. So I'm aware of myself and I'm aware of what I'm doing, but I'm also at the same time aware and listening to and connecting with the other musicians. Now this translates to the world of presenting. When you're presenting alone on stage, the audiences, in a sense, they're like the other musicians. So you're presenting, you're telling your story, but you're asking questions. They might just be rhetorical questions for a very large presentation, but they are all part of it. Your audience is not removed or not something out there. They're actually a part of you. They're a part of your presentation, and that really is at the heart of connection. The other thing I learned from being a musician for all these years is this idea of leaving your audience hungry for more. I mean, you never want to play past the time where they said, okay, you know, that's enough. But think about this if you apply the idea to meetings and presentations. So if someone gives you 20 minutes to make a presentation, take 18 minutes or 19 minutes, but never go over. Or if you have an hour, take 55 minutes. In the history of presentations or meetings, I don't think anyone's ever complained if the meeting was a little bit short. If we're going to make a connection, then we have to remove some barriers. And there are many things that can act as barriers to our ability to connect with an audience. But some of the most common ones are things like turning the lights off when you're giving a presentation. Now, it's true that turning the lights off will make the slides look better, but you have to go for a compromise in that situation because the audience has to see you. If they can't see you, there is no connection. Other things like if there's a podium and you have the option not to use the podium, then don't use it. I say get away from the podium or the lectern so that you can make a connection and get out closer to your audience. Along those lines, are things like using a clip-on mic or a lavalier microphone, a little clip-on. And again, that way it allows you to move around, to get far away from the lectern and the podium and make a connection with the audience. The other thing is to use a small remote control, not a large remote control, but use a small one. And the remote control allows you to, again, walk around, be closer to the audience, and basically go wherever you want to go. And that's very important when we're talking about making a connection. With delivery, remember that the key tenet running throughout is naturalness, right? Naturalness is the goal. And we do that by being in the moment. And if we're in the moment, then we're better able to make a connection and engage our audience. And remember, without connection, there can be no contribution, and no one is going to get our story. So, what's the conclusion? The conclusion is, there is no conclusion. There's only the next step. And the next step is completely up to you. You know, you can make improvements in even very small ways. And this reminds me of a Japanese idea which you may have heard about before called Kaizen. Kaizen means continuous improvement. And in the spirit of Kaizen, even very, very tiny improvements are very important. You don't have to make improvements in huge gains. You can make step-by-step improvements as well. Well, how do you improve? Well, there are many ways. The first thing you can do is just volunteer to present. The more that you present, the better you're going to get. You can present internally in your company. You can volunteer to present for your community group, whatever it is. But look for opportunities to make a presentation or to make a speech. You could volunteer or join a Toastmasters and take advantage of the education that they have within Toastmasters, or even volunteer to make a presentation within Toastmasters. You could also volunteer to make a presentation at Pechakucha, or just find a Pechakucha event in your city and just attend and see how the constraints in Pechakucha really lead to good storytelling. And of course, you can read. There are many books on presentations which are very good, of course, and communication, but you can also learn a lot about slide design and communication by reading books about graphic design, web design, interior design, and just design in general. And of course, you can also learn a lot by reading the book, Presentation Zen, and following my thoughts and discoveries on the Presentation Zen blog. But remember, in the end, it's all up to you. Ganbatte kudasai. All over. There are Pechakucha nights in city also, or the rather more is. I can never get that, so I should just not say it. I'm just gonna say it as if this was the last take ever.
Do it one more time.
So again, when you're away from the computer, you ask yourself these two important questions. Sorry, that was a long way to say it. It's all right? All right? All right.
It's all right.
All right.
And action.
So that's a little bit about how I do it. Now you're gonna think, you know, story.
Very true, those words. Only the next step.
Okay. And we can get a connection with our audience if we remember to be in the moment. And I am really hot under these lights. No, it's only hot here.
Yeah.
And this is where my brain is.
Okay. One more time. Where you at?
So.
Okay, ready?
So, Smithers. Excellent. Okay.
Release the house.
Some stooge in Sector Z. Okay.
Do you feel fabulous?
No, don't get me laughing now. Is it?
Flower. Big flower.
Listen.
Where is that?
So you.
What's that got to do with it?
Very good it is. As you can see. All in here. Ne. Hi. Don't include that.